All right, everybody. Welcome. This is an interview that's sponsored by the Architectural Foundation of San Francisco. AFSF is a nonprofit that provides technical training and mentorship to middle school and high school students who are considering a career in design. The mission of the foundation is to enhance the awareness and appreciation of architecture and the design process in the local community. And with us today, we have Adrianne Steichen of PYOTAK Architecture and Urban Design. Adrianne, thanks you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, we'll just hop right in and say, can you
Sure.
just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I'm actually a Bay Area native. I grew up in Danville, a suburb of San Francisco in the outer East Bay. My mom was a high school science teacher, and my dad worked in computers and information science. He really wanted me to go into web design. And, when I was in high school, that was not yet really a field. Um, I have a younger sibling who lives in Las Vegas with their family. Um, I studied architecture at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. I graduated in 2001 with a professional degree in architecture and a minor in film studies.
Oh, okay.
And I say professional degree in architecture because when I graduated, it was a Bachelor of Architecture, a 5-year degree. And while I was a student, they were testing a 5-year master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And about 3 years after I graduated, they decided to confer master's nomenclature on everyone who had ever graduated from the 5-year bachelor program. It was still a 5-year degree,
Right.
it's still a first professional degree, but on my transcript, I have a Bachelor of Architecture in 2001 and a Master of Architecture in 2004.
Gotcha.
I did not go back to school.
I did not go back to school. I like it.
Yeah, it was essentially a free master's nomenclature degree, and a $50 new diploma.
That's awesome. I wish they just gave out master's degrees like
I
that.
know, it was a pretty sweet deal, actually.
Yeah.
We had a whole ceremony and everything. It was great.
Oh, I mean, it's actually great that you bring that up. Obviously, we're talking to students who are considering this. And I know in another episode with Chris Wozny, we've gone down the path of kind of a master's in architecture if you didn't have a bachelor's, right?
Hmm.
And I want to say that's typically a 3-year program, right? At least at UC
Three and
Berkeley,
a
it's a
half.
3.5. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that would be if you chose to, study anything else or not anything else, but
Philosophy.
right. It's something more
Yeah.
along the liberal arts line, but then
Yeah.
decided that architecture was the path that you were going to go down. Uh, it was going to be a master's degree, right? But it was about a 3.5-year program.
Yeah. I only applied to colleges that I could start an architecture program on day one.
Gotcha.
So I only really applied to Bachelor of Architecture 5-year professional degree programs, with the exception of UCLA. And I think that was more of a all my friends are going to go to school in Southern California, and maybe I should apply to a UC school. And Berkeley is too close to home,
Right.
even though it's
Right.
a
Bay Area kid.
fantastic school.
It is. It is.
Um, there, at least in the 90s, there was this trend of the Bay Area kids went to school in LA and the LA kids went to school in the Bay Area, whether that was at Santa Cruz or Davis or, this broader definition of the Bay Area, Northern
Right.
California.
Right.
You
So
got
my
out of town and you got away from your parents, but you were still in state.
100%. And my
Yeah.
wife fits that mold. She grew up north of the Bay Area, up in way northern California, and went to UCLA. So
Yeah.
fits the mold 100%.
Yeah.
So you said that you wanted to go somewhere with a degree in architecture right away. So I'm guessing that you had a pretty strong sense that you wanted to be an architect.
Hmm.
Was there a moment that you can kind of trace to, I'll call it the Lego moment, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, this is my calling, or this is something that I need to do.
I was always drawing. I did a lot of art classes. And I like to build pillow forts with the couch cushions. They were pretty sturdy, and you could use them to even do a roof, because you could bridge over. My parents really encouraged my interest. I had a furniture from Scandinavian Designs, which is still a furniture store here in the Bay Area. It was all modular, and my mom, being very savvy, was, I wanted to rearrange my furniture regularly. And she said to me, that's nice, I'll help you, but you have to plan that out first.
Okay.
So she actually taught me how to measure and draw my room to scale. So I drew it out on gridded paper, each square representing a foot. And I measured everything in my room, my furniture, where the doors were, where the windows was, where the closet was. And I cut the furniture out to scale, and I space planned
I
on
love it.
the gridded paper. And then when I was done, I taped it all down, or I glued it all down, I forget which. And once I had a satisfactory plan, my parents running quality control of like, oh no, you actually need space to like open doors and things like that. Because I was probably, I don't know, 9 or 10 at the time. And once that was all set, they would help me move furniture in my room.
That's
But I had
awesome.
to space plan it first. And then I would also, like, when my mom would go shopping at the drugstore, the grocery store, the magazine aisle had magazines full of home plans. And I would plant myself in the magazine aisle. My mom would go off and do her shopping, and I would just look at plans for 45 minutes or however long she was shopping for.
That's awesome.
So, and then I was also, my high school had I guess they were sort of blue collar skills kinds of stuff. This is the department that housed like wood shop and electronics and auto shop. And they also had an architectural drawing program.
Did they really?
So I took 4 years of architectural drawing in high school.
Wow.
3 of it through the program, and then I guess 3.5 years, and then a semester that was independent study. So I really knew how to draw things to scale when I was in high school, and thought I knew what architecture school was going to be like, and I was not correct. But I'd had an introduction, and I didn't need the first thing that we did in architecture school was learn how to use an architectural scale and read that tool properly.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, kind of your expectations of what architecture school was going to be versus reality?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was great about that architecture drawing class in my high school was that it was not really graded. It was graded insofar as everybody started out with a score of 100. You had an A+ when you walked in the door. And if you were late, if you missed a class, if you turned in an assignment late, then you got a deduct on your perfect score. And every time you got an assignment back, you knew what your score was because it was in the bottom right corner, and you knew what your grade was. And there were ways to, build that back up, but it was pretty straightforward. It was show up, do the work.
Right.
Which was actually pretty good training for life when you think about it. Like, show up, do the work, and you're going to be fine.
Right.
It wasn't about how beautiful the drawing was. It wasn't about anything about the creativity. It was teaching a different kind of discipline through this medium.
Right.
And that is not what architecture school was.
Right.
Architecture school was much more about the content of the work and the process of the work, and not about just showing up and doing the work.
Right.
And so that was really a departure in my experience, even though I think that training around discipline was really good for architecture school, that it was important to still show up and go through the process and do the drawings and not let the creativity or lack of creativity get in the way of trying something.
Right. Right.
So that was really, I think, valuable experience, but I was not prepared for the kinds of assignments that we would get. Things like in my first semester, things like take a common household object and then design something that exposes something inherent in that object. So my object was a cassette tape.
Love it.
So design something that expresses something inherent about a cassette tape and magnifies it.
Oh,
so you could tell how traumatic that was, because that was not a recent experience for me. But I was like, what is this nonsense that we're doing?
Our students in school today might have to go Google what a cassette tape is.
Yeah, that's probably true. Somebody else had a spray nozzle for a garden hose.
Oh man.
There was a series of objects that we had to choose from.
Gotcha.
And I think I picked cassette tape, which is even more ludicrous. But there were like 5 or 6 objects that we had to pick from. Right.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
So, okay. So much different than you expected, going from having had a good base in high school to, a college program in architecture.
Yeah. And I mean, I had taken these architecture classes. I had taken art classes. I had taken sort of studio art kind of classes. I had taken an art class at Diablo Valley College my senior year, and
a strong drafting program.
Yeah, I didn't take an architecture class there, but I did take an art, like a studio art class.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I had taken a computers and art combo class, and that was actually in web design. We were learning HTML programming, and we were also drawing, and it was team taught by the computers teacher and one of the art teachers. I had a very progressive high school, public high school.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So we have board meetings with the foundation every few months now, and we just checked in last week, and we're running a few different programs. One of them in East Bay and Antioch, that are geared towards high school students who have minimal exposure. In fact, to the degree, I think it was brought up that one student, when she entered this program, she had never heard of architecture. Like, this was like brand new. And so our mentors get to do some, we're talking starting at the basics, but like really get to expose, our students to this type of stuff. And at the end of a 6-week program, I couldn't give you a percentage, but many of them are coming out like, wow, this stuff is really cool, right? This is at least something I would consider, which is the whole mission of our foundation. So,
sure.
But I like that you're bringing up the differences in expectation. And if you're comfortable, my next question is going to be, what was your difference in expectation from when you graduated to getting your first job at a design firm? And kind of what that looked like, and maybe even now that you're in a leadership role, what that looks like now if you're hiring folks.
Yeah, I mean, so from my experience, I did some work study kind of stuff in school where I worked for the Southeast Architectural Archives at Tulane University, and so I was doing exhibit design. There, and then I had an internship between my 3rd and 4th year working for a branding and marketing company doing naming of products, and we worked on some pretty big multinational campaigns, things that I still see in the world today, which is kind of amazing, and did a lot of iterative design using Adobe products Illustrator and Photoshop. So I learned a lot about Illustrator and Photoshop, and a precursor to InDesign called Quark Express. Quark is actually what Adobe's InDesign is based on.
Gotcha.
But I was working for them during the .com boom in San Francisco in '99. That was my internship. And then between the fourth and fifth year, I worked for a firm in Walnut Creek that was multidisciplinary. They had a lot of different kind of project types. They did schools and high-end residential and fire stations and office buildings and apartment buildings and land planning. And I did a lot of hand coloring of elevations and site plans and sections in that job. And I worked for them for a summer, and then about this time, sort of March, April of my last year of architecture school, they called me and asked me if I wanted to intern for them again. And I said, well, I'm graduating, so I'm actually going to be looking for a full-time job, not an internship. And they said, let me call you back. And they called me back and they said, we'd like to offer you a job.
Nice.
And so I took that job. It was, I didn't hunt around. I didn't interview a bunch of places. I do regret that a little bit. But at the time, it was comforting for me to know that I had a job waiting for me. I mean, that was March, April, and I graduated in mid-May, and I started in June.
Right.
So that was great. I worked there for 4 years, right out of school, and took all of my exams while I was working with them, and worked for about 1.5 years on high-end residential, and decided, gosh, that's just not for me. I can't handle working on 40,000 square foot single family homes with outbuildings like 6-car garages and an art studio and a gatehouse and an art house and a guest house and a pool house and wood shop and a bar. It wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And so I moved within the firm to working on public schools. And did public school modernization work, sort of upgrades to facilities. No new construction, all rehabilitation work. And even worked on my old high school.
Really?
Yeah. Because we had contracts with that district. So mostly I worked on elementary schools, so lots of like little kid facilities. And so it was. I think that was really good for me as a training ground to learn some really technical stuff pretty early in my career. Things that don't necessarily happen in my job right now, I have experience doing, working with the state architect, and having experience with the division of the state architect who provides oversight for fire, structural safety, and accessibility for all public facilities, including public schools. I attended a bid opening where the contractors had to hand deliver their bid for construction to a room, and I had to record it on a handwritten spreadsheet, what the company's name was, their contact, what their bid was, what their alternates were going to cost, as part of a public thing that doesn't, I think, happen anymore in the same way.
I don't think so either. I have a couple clients that do schools, but yeah, I think it's changed a lot, even just in COVID in the last few years, right?
Yeah. And I was doing this as a person like 3 years out of school.
Wow.
I was representing the firm doing that. And so I think I had this accelerated learning working in that typology. And you were also asking me about sort of what does that mean for new folks entering the industry and
Right.
what that means for the kinds of experience we're interested in.
Right.
I mean, we want people who are I I am always looking for somebody who's a lifelong learner, somebody that's curious, that is self-motivated. Um, they're not waiting for me to tell them how to do something. They are doing some research on their own and then, checking in, making sure that it's the thing to do before just going off and doing it, but that they've done some base level of activity research thinking about
Right.
the problem before it gets to me.
Right.
Um, and that they're, I didn't move. I haven't moved jobs very much. I'm, at PYOTAK. I've been here since 2005, and really only my second job in architecture, because I'm not going to count the two internships that were sort of adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, only the second firm I've ever worked for
That's
in a
awesome.
20-year career,
Right.
which is not usual. It is far more typical to have more like 5 or 6 at this point, at least.
Right. I mean, there's a whole conversation that we could probably turn into an hour-long episode, but kind of about coming out of school and, you joined a smaller firm that had a lot of different options, a lot of different project types to be able to get exposed to. I think of that as kind of the flipped would be to go work for one of the biggest architecture firms, which being in the Bay Area, you can absolutely find those offices. Um, I don't think those positions right out of the gate are going to expose you to a whole lot of variety. I think it's going to be more like, this is your 1 year in this studio of this, project type. This is what we do, and this is your one job, and you're just going to do that over and over again. And I think there's positives and negatives to both of that. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's kind of just, what are you looking for as a person, right? What excites you, and what might be right for you at 23 or 24 years old, will change
Yeah.
down the road. So
Yeah. I mean, there's some good amount of self-reflection, introspection that you need to do as you're exiting architecture school or thinking about graduating, um, around what kind of place you want to be at.
mm-hmm.
I knew that I did not want to go work at a big multinational architecture firm.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't what was interesting to me. What was interesting to me was things that were more local,
Mm-hmm.
that were embedded, um, I mean, that firm that I worked for, I could drive around and see the result of their work.
Right.
It was all very close to home. Um, and that's true of PYOTAK too. Most of our work is in the Greater Bay Area,
Right.
and a lot of our work is in Oakland. And I I have been in some of the tippy top towers in Oakland, and I can walk around the perimeter and in every direction point out buildings in the downtown that we did
Right.
in the last 15, 16 years,
Right.
um, which is very satisfying to have that impact. It is for me, anyways.
Right. 100%.
Um, but that's not going to be for everybody. Some folks really want international impact.
Right.
They want to design cities. They want to work on the tallest building or the most sustainable building, um, or whatever the goal is. And all of those are perfectly interesting and valid and worthwhile pursuits. They
Right.
just weren't for me.
Right.
That wasn't my motivator.
Like it. Um, if we were going to switch gears a little bit and talk
Hmm.
about leadership,
Hmm.
because you have ascended to a leadership role as a principal at PyTalk. Are you managing principal?
I am not the managing
Not managing. Okay,
principal.
gotcha.
No.
But
We're sort of just now creating that
gotcha,
position. Yeah.
gotcha. But a leadership role. And um, can you talk a little bit about what it was like getting into a leadership role in a design firm, and then maybe some leaders that have inspired you along the way in the design
Yeah.
industry?
Yeah. I mean, I am my mother's daughter. I am always engaged and active, and anything that I take on, I am going to have a leadership responsibility of some sort, whether that's an official role or not. Um, I had been here for about a year, and the principal, one of the principals at the time, came to me and said, we're really interested in you joining this leadership management group that we call the associates. PYOTAK has a formal management program. Formal, it's defined,
Okay.
and I would not say that it's not any more formal than in that it's defined, but that there are associates, senior associates, associate principals, and principals.
Okay.
And if you are one of those, you are in an ownership path and a management responsibility. And we expect sort of 2 years or so as an associate and 2 years or so as a senior associate before you're eligible really to become an associate principal. And then roughly 2 years as an associate principal before becoming a principal. At associate principal level, folks start actually having a small ownership at that level. And so I'd been here about a year. I had about 6 years total experience in architecture. The day before I joined PYOTAK, I found out I had passed my California supplemental exam. So I had interviewed here as a non-licensed architect, and I started as essentially a licensed architect. And after about a year, they said, we'd really like to invite you to join this, but we want you to do X, Y, and Z before we make that step. We did X, Y, and Z, which was really around sort of taking more of a management role at a project level. I hadn't had that experience at the firm yet. And then and I spent 3 years as an associate and really focusing on staff training and staff development and morale. And then spent about 3 years as a senior associate building my external communication and client development, making connections in the industry. That's also about the time that I did Leadership San Francisco, which is a program with the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. It's a year-long program for sort of civic leadership. And then in 2014, I became an associate principal.
Nice.
And 2016, a full principal.
Awesome.
Which sounds very linear, I know. Which it's probably, it seems very linear maybe in description, but it's more of the intent of our associates program is to help folks learn how to run the business.
Right.
And we're pretty open with how we are doing as a business. We do a financial quarterly review with our staff, and we kind of open the whole book and talk to people about what our profitability was, where we were spending overhead money, how well different projects did, how many kinds of projects we had, what was profitable and what wasn't profitable. And we look at that and we make projections for the next quarter or for the next year. But we talk about that pretty openly with everybody on our staff.
Mhm.
And the folks in the associates program get a little deeper dive.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It is a linear path, but I think what I really heard and what I hope our listeners and our students get from that is that there is a certain set of skills that's needed to progress, right? And it's not, to tie it back, it's not those skills that you learned in college and getting a degree necessarily. Those are very valuable, but those are kind of to get you an entry level. And then there's a lot of on the job training that happens. And then running a business and being a leader is a completely different skill set, right? It
Yeah.
just is. You can
It,
learn it, but it's just not the same as as design. So
yeah, it is a very different skill set. And, some folks who are very skilled at design should never own a company. And that's also totally fine.
right, right,
If you're really great at design, find a partner who's really great at business,
right,
and then respect each other's spaces.
right, right. I actually heard that. I've heard it many, many times, but the biggest one that hit me was Patrick McLamey, who was
Mm,
the managing principal of HOK for years. Lives in the North Bay, still does a lot of speaking, and I think he got hired on his first job. His only job in architecture was HOK from the beginning, and I think they came to him and very kindly said, you are I'm paraphrasing, but you're an average designer, but a good leader. So, do you want to be a great leader kind of thing, right?
yeah.
Maybe that's a little not doing him justice, but there's, within the world of design, there's many paths that you can go down. And
Yeah. And PYOTAK, we have 6 principals and 1 associate principal right now.
right,
And not every one of us has the same skill sets.
right, right.
And as a business, that's very smart of us
100%. I
for
was just saying, I
for
hope
us
it
to
wouldn't be
not
that way.
for us to not all have the exact same skills. We have
Right,
overlapping skills. There are
right,
things that I'm good at that my partners are also good at.
right,
Um, but there are things that I will do that they're not interested in.
right, right.
Um, you can't run a business if nobody really wants to deal with HR problems,
Right.
for example.
Or if one person runs unchecked, right? If one person, I mean, I guess I'm watching We Crashed right now on Apple
Yeah.
TV, and it's very pertinent to me because I was in the office, the Oakland WeWork office in
Mm.
2018 and 19,
Oh
and
gosh.
loved it, and I thought it was the coolest thing, right? I was coming from a more stuffy environment, so to go to, was it 1111 Broadway there,
Mm-hmm.
and you walk in and they've got, I mean, it's just like the show says, like there's the kegs of beer, there's the kombucha on tap, there's the ping pong
Right.
tables and everything.
Right.
And I thought that was super cool. And my wife is a part of my business. And so we're talking through this and she's watching this guy make crazy decisions. And she's like, why is nobody checking him? Like, why is no, and it's just like, well, that's the leadership dynamic that they created. And it doesn't have its checks and balances. So, yeah, I'm a big
I
fan.
watched that. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Miguel tried,
Yeah,
but
I think he did a little bit.
I think he tried,
Yeah.
but it's difficult
Yeah.
I think in that particular example, it's a cult of personality.
Right, right. Yeah,
So,
he's a dominating personality, but
right.
anyways, well, one last question for you
Sure.
before we let you go, and it's the one that we always end with, which is, what is the best advice that you could give to an up and coming design professional? So, if one of our students is in high school right now and watching this and considering a very strongly considering a career in design, what advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, there's the cliche that architects are good at math.
Okay.
It's like saying that doctors have good handwriting. It's not true necessarily. Um, don't be intimidated if you're in high school and you're thinking about architecture. Don't be intimidated by this notion of a profession.
Okay.
We are lifelong learners as professionals. try things out when you're in school, travel, test out theories for yourself. And then once you're out, recommit yourself to learning.
Right.
There's always going to be an evolution in this profession. There's changes in technology, as we were getting to earlier, systems, materials, regulations, politics, design. And I think this is maybe something I hadn't realized, is how much politics and regulations really influence the built environment and really influence the world in which we all operate. And that what we see is a resultant often of these influences, for good or bad. And that you can change them. You can change the things that influence this built environment, but it does take passion to do that. And I know that answer kind of is all over the place, but that is also architecture. Architecture is one of the most comprehensive degrees that you can have.
Right.
We learn philosophy, psychology, sociology, technology, physics, chemistry to a certain degree, art, politics. And I'm going to run out of things to say, but it covers much more than what I've even mentioned.
Right.
If you're really practicing architecture.
Right.
And I will say that there's a class that you take in architecture school called professional practice, and it is intended to help you, to expose you to things like contracts and the responsibilities that you have as a professional. And one of the things that my professor of practice told my class was, I'm not here to teach you to be an architect. I'm here to teach you how to lead. And that was maybe one of the most impactful things that they could have said to me.
Right.
That she was there not to teach me how to be an architect, but to be a leader in my communities.
Right. I love it. I love it. That's great advice. Well, that's a great place for us to leave it. Adrianne, thank you so much. This was excellent. Really, really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you.